This is why tariffs are so dangerous, because people will focus on the industry and not the broader economic ecosystem market that affects. It runs through everything. If tractors are made of steel and tractors are used to harvest crops, you've just increased the cost of food flat out, right? You've increased the cost of one of their inputs, so you've increased the cost of production. You've increased it. People are going to have less. That's what the increased cost is. And you're going to face that decision. You're going to face the problems associated with that. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Today's topic is going to be tariffs. They've been in the news left, right, and center. Our current president seems to be a firm believer in implementing tariffs for a variety of reasons. And today we want to discuss why tariffs actually make us all poor. I know, hold on one second though, because here's what we're going to do. Most of you don't have all day. So I'm going to summarize what my argument is here for you just real quick. And then in the comments, we'll post the various sections as we go along in the argument. Okay. But we're going to approach this in a manner that I don't think other people have. And the difference is this. People focus on free trade, the argument about tariffs and free trade. Like free trade is the issue, or free trade is what we're after. No, it's not. Free trade is not the issue. What the issue is the division of labor. And here's the summary. The division of labor makes us all more productive. When we're more productive, wealth grows, okay? But when we're more productive, we have to be able to sell what we produce, right? If I produce 1,000 loaves of bread, can't eat them all. I need to trade. The more I can trade, the more I can produce. And that's important. The more I trade, the more I can produce. The more that I can produce, the more I can take advantage of the division of labor. Of course, the more division of labor I take advantage of, greater the productivity. And of course, the greater the productivity, the greater the wealth of the nation. This is Adam Smith's argument. So that is the summary of the argument. We are going to be talking about why and how tariffs impact, not free trade, the division of labor, the fundamental building block of, the wealth of nations, and Adam Smith's argument. First thing I want to begin with is, if I mention Adam Smith, okay, and this may have already happened, you may have already thought this, when I mention Adam Smith, the first thing people are going to think of is free trade, or even free markets. Might even think libertarian, although he wasn't a libertarian. All these thoughts come to mind. And it's very curious that even though all these thoughts come to mind, when you open The Wealth of Nations, chapter 1, book 1, it's on the division of labor. And you might want to just pause for a second there, like, wait a second, what? Well, we get to free trade, but he starts with the division of labor. And here's the reason why. Smith's fundamental insight, probably in writing The Wealth of Nations, is that wealth does not consist of money. Adam Smith is no fan, of course, of balance of trade kind of tabulations, whether you have money coming in or money going out. Money is not wealth. Gold is not wealth. You can't eat gold. You can't eat money. Can't make a house out of it. It just blows away. If you have credit cards, it just money doesn't do anything except buy things, buy stuff. And it's this stuff, the stuff that the money can buy, the stuff that money can purchase, that constitutes the wealth of a nation. So as people have better or more housing, food, clothing, entertainment, you name it, I say stuff because that's probably the best word we can use, but the more stuff that people have, the wealthier the nation. Okay. And so that's his fundamental insight. So when he writes The Wealth of Nations, the question is, well, how do some nations become wealthy and others not so? Right, or on the continuum, that what makes a nation wealthy? Now you can see why we start with the argument with the division of labor. All right. And we're going to start from the beginning here. You can jump ahead. Like I said, look in the comments. You can see where there'd be different timestamps for different parts of this argument. By the way, when you're down there looking at those comments, hit the like button if you like us, and leave a comment. So, division of labor, coming back to that. We kind of take this for granted now, but let's walk with Adam Smith for just a second. So Smith notes that if somebody was making, and I don't know why he chooses pins. Apparently pins were much more important than 1776, but this is the example he uses, is pins. So let us say you were making pins by yourself. That is, you have to get the wire, you draw the wire out, you cut the wire, you have to sharpen one end, put a head on the other end. Apparently they painted their pins and then they wrapped them individually. Wow, it's a lot of work for one pin, but that's what people do. He notes that maybe you could make a couple, maybe a few hundred, if you're really fast, in a day by yourself, doing all those tests by yourself. However, what happens when we get people and we divide them up into different jobs? It's one person's to draw out the wire and cut it, another's to sharpen it, another's to put the head on, another to paint, another to wrap. So we get, that's 5 different people, right? Draw it out, sharpen, head, paint. Yeah, 5. We get 5 people all together on this line, each doing just one thing and then passing the semi-finished product off. What happens then? Well, here's quite literally the magic of the division of labor. It's not an additive function. Right? So if there's 5 of us and we could each produce 200 pins a day by ourselves, we put 5 of us together, does that mean we'll get 1,000 pins a day? No, actually, you put us together like this in the division of labor, and it turns out we can get thousands of pins a day, right? Way more than any one of us working by ourselves, and way more than if you just added us together. And so Smith notes this and he highlights this, right? He spends some time explaining this, that this is how we become more productive. We participate in the division of labor. Historically, you might be familiar with this. Maybe one of the most common examples is the production line of Henry Ford, right? The car moving down the production line, each person doing one job, and Henry Ford being able to mass produce Ford automobiles at the time. When we think about assembly lines within factories, we can think about the division of labor quite often. Those are popular ways of thinking about it. Other ways within the firm too to realize where the division of labor is going on is to understand that if you have accountants and people who do marketing, that's the division of labor, right? So in your offices, in the C-suite, as well as on the shop floor, anytime you see somebody doing a specific task and they're devoted to that task, they're partaking in the division of labor. And it's because the accountant can do far more accounting work if they just focus on accounting, rather than if they had to do some accounting work and then go put some spot welds on the car. That doesn't even make sense to our ears. That's how accustomed we are within the firm to the division of labor. And that makes the firm more productive. What people don't realize sometimes when talking about this, right? Because all we're talking right now is a division of labor and being more productive, having more stuff. That's going to be the source of wealth. Is that the division of labor also applies not just within firms, but outside of firms, in between firms, right? So you go get your oil change at your favorite oil change place. They specialize either in oil changes or in a very narrow scope of, what they do, auto mechanics, right? That's what the shop's dedicated to, fixing your car. And by the way, your machine mechanic might not be a body shop person. You might have to go to a different place if you dent your car. That's specialization within each firm. The business specializes. It can do its job better. It can do its job quicker. It can do its job more cheaply, which we'll get to, if it focuses. So I keep wanting to use the example of blockbusters, but they're long gone because we have Netflix now and we have streaming video. But once again, there are floral shops, there are places to go do yoga, just drive down whatever commercial street is in your city, town, locale. Just look at all the different stores and register how each one of those is specialized. That's the division of labor that increases productivity. Each one of those is more productive, specializing in what they do rather than if they tried to do everything. We can come back to things like Walmart and the rest if you want to in a minute, but right now let's stay with that. So the division of labor makes us more productive, but here's the kicker. Does the story end there? No, it can't actually end there. So let's go back to the pins because it's kind of a funky, weird example. But let's say I'm making pins and Smith says, well, wait a second. If you're in the Highlands of Scotland and your next neighbor is a couple miles away, it really doesn't pay you to be more productive with pins because you could produce a few thousand pins. What are you going to do with them? You can't eat them. They're not good for you. They're really uncomfortable to sleep on. And once again, building anything with pins is out of the question. So, right, you have just a few neighbors. You might be able to sell a few of them, but then you're just left with a lot of pins. So it's not just more stuff. It's more stuff in the hands of the people who want it, right? So not just bigger piles of pins sitting around, but the fact that the pins are made and they get to the people who want them, who value them. So the increased production only adds value, only adds wealth, if in turn we can get them to the people who want them. And in a market economy, that's through sales, prices, all that good stuff, right? Trade. So we need to be able to trade the excess production, okay? Now, as I said, the more trade that you can do and participate in, then the more you can produce. Okay. So if I'm, producing 5,000 pins and I'm selling 5,000, there's really no reason for me to invest any further in the division of labor and make even more. Because while might be more productive and reduce the cost per pin of production because I'm now more efficient, it doesn't make any sense because I'm just going to end up with a surplus that I can't get rid of, right? It has to be that I have to be able to get rid of it. So now I have to expand my markets, right? And if I can expand my market, I can make more and I can then sell more or sell more and then make more. And I want to bring up something right here that's really important. So a lot of books have come out over the decades that I've been alive. Small is beautiful. And, people ask, why do you have to, why do you have to get bigger or why do you have to grow, or they'll attribute it to greed. It's actually more subtle than that. And it's around this point. So maybe I can be happy being small. I'm just doing my shop, doing my thing, producing my little corner of the widget world, and that's good for me. But here's the problem. If my competitor finds a way to expand their market and then finds, a way to increase their division of labor, then they become more productive and more efficient. That means not only can they produce more than me, but they can produce it cheaper. And if they can produce it cheaper, they can sell it for less than I do and still make a profit. So in that situation, and that's the situation many, many businesses face, I have to constantly look to expand my markets. I have to constantly strive to be more efficient and productive. And maybe that's a helpful way to look at it, right? It's not just for its own sake. Like we said about free trade earlier, it's not something you just do because you want bigger markets, right? And bigger markets. You're looking for that so that you can go back to your production or provision, because this could be goods or services, work on that process so that it's more efficient, so that you get more output for comparatively less input. Not a bad thing for sustainability either, right? You want to decrease inputs, increase outputs. That is a way to conserve. In fact, that might even be the definition of conserve. You could let me know in the comments if you don't agree with that. But you see what I mean. Okay. Division of labor gives us more stuff. Stuff is wealth, but only if it gets into the right hands. And the way it's going to get into the right hands is trade. The more I can trade, the more I can produce. And then the more I can take advantage of the division of labor, right? Making my firm more productive. After we go through that list, after we go through this progression in Smith, now we get to the stuff about trade. But actually not even yet, because what Smith then goes into in like chapter 2, and it's a really strange part. Like if you do happen to read the first 3 chapters of Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, I highly recommend it. Just the first 3 chapters, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But in chapter 2, he goes off into this little tangent about how expensive it is to transport things by wagons and mules and oxen over land. He goes into all the costs involved with it and how limited the tonnage is that one can move across land with animals and carts versus how much one can, move, trade, transport. That's the word I was looking for, by ship. And you're like, okay, that's an interesting aside. And we'll go back on now to the main points he was talking about. But the thing is, and this took me way too long to realize in life, it's not an aside, okay? So we typically talk about, right, how much one can trade, because that's going to determine, I have to fit my productive capacity to that. How much I can trade is my market. And what Smith is talking about in chapter 2, when he's discussing this, is really what the limits and extents of our markets are. And they're not, how do I want to say this? They're not written in stone. I almost want to say objective, but that's going to be the wrong term. Our economic interactions, maybe that's the best way to set it, or the ability of our economic interactions set the limits of our markets. What do I mean by that? What does he mean by that? Well, if I'm trading over land and I can put so much on the cart and now I send the oxen team off, every mile they go increases the cost of transport. At some point, that cost of transport has eaten away all my profits. It's not now profitable to go the next mile, right? Unlike Samwise Gamgee's and The Lord of the Rings, this is as far as I've ever gone. Nope, we're turning back now, right? We're not going to go one more further because now I'm at a loss. So transportation costs are a primary factor in determining the extent of our market. This means that if I go over land in Smith's time, right? If I go over land, the radius of my market outside of London was really actually very small, okay? Very, very small. However, if I transport by ship, I can load the ship up, I can load the ship up, and I can sail from London to Edinburgh, which is 500 miles away, profitably. So while, let's say 20 miles outside of London might not be my market, 500 miles is, because it's not the miles, it's the cost of the miles. So I can load the ship up, sail it, and do it in such a way that now I can sell my goods competitively in Edinburgh. So Edinburgh is my market. London and Edinburgh, not the rather close, but yet too far for oxen, suburbs of London. And I think this really bears reflection and repeating, that markets are not geographic, or they're not geographically determined in the way most people think they are. They'll look at a point at a map, they'll pan the map out or in, you know what I mean? And it looks like, well, if the company's here, then its market's right here, right? The company's at the epicenter, it's right at the center of the big circle that we're going to draw, and that's going to be their market. And that's not it at all. There's no reason that it has to be physically next to each other. The different markets that a firm might have depends on their cost of transport. This is why railroads are so important. So we go look at a map, and this now finally is where we get to the trade issue, the free trade issue. Edinburgh, 500 miles away from London, much, much closer than Edinburgh to London. Amsterdam, the coast of France, two different countries. So for the same reasons that a producer is going to ship from London will be the same reasons they'll want to ship to Amsterdam or ship to Cannes or even up the Seine to Paris, right? They're just looking to expand markets so that they can increase productivity and produce more efficiently, make more stuff, make people more wealthy. That's it. There's no politics to the matter. It's all the logic of production and wealth creation. But interestingly enough, and we know this in today's atmosphere, and it was the same in Smith's time, if you want to go 500 miles away and travel with your fellow country people or people closely tied to your fellow country people, that's not a problem. But as soon as now you want to trade across, the relatively narrow Straits of Dover, which people have actually swum across, but the people on the other side, they speak a different language, they have a different king, they have a different parliament, different political system. Now all hell breaks loose because now we're trading not with us, but we're trading with them. And now all these questions come up because it's us and them. Who's getting richer? Who's losing? Is it a fair deal? All this stuff that never comes up when you're shipping right from Indiana to California, which is a really great distance, right? We're talking almost probably 2,000 miles. But yet, if I go 500 miles north from Indiana to Canada, all of a sudden it's us and them. And these questions come up. They did the same in Smith's time, and he recognizes that. But why I wanted to start where we started was to show that Smith doesn't just burst into the scene saying, oh, you're all crazy. It's free trade, free trade, free trade. And I'm going to hold my breath until you realize that. There's a whole backstory to this. And this backstory about the division of labor and productivity, look at the news now, and you're going to see that it's a different argument, right? Because the news now is, when people who are detractors of tariffs are arguing, they'll talk about tariffs being a tax. They are. They'll talk about tariffs ultimately being a tax on the consumer in the country that passes it. So, yeah, they are. American consumers are going to pay for American tariffs. But it's kind of like the argument doesn't go any further. It's like we should, at that point, we should all just kind of realize, right, that's, maybe why this is bad. And then, of course, those who are in favor of tariffs will either talk something about these days economic statecraft, or they'll talk about ways in which the tariffs are actually benefiting, contrary to the economists. And then we sort of go on this industry by industry comparison, like, oh, this is how the steel industry is going to improve with 25% tariffs, okay, and how that's going to make the country greater and all the rest. I mean, that's the flow of the argument. Just look at the news. But if we go back to the fundamentals, we're not going to start talking about single industries. We're talking about economic systems. At the very least, we're talking about countries. We should be talking about markets, but we can even talk about, we're talking about something that's broader than any single industry. And when we realize that, we can now begin to see why tariffs, even if they do benefit a certain industry, and they will, right? There will be winners, lots more losers. But why the country and people in general, but why the country's not going to benefit? And it can't. And that's because by their very nature, what tariffs are designed to do is reduce markets and reduce trade, right? if we were already reducing trade, or if there were no trade, tariffs would be like dumb. Like, why are we putting tariffs on Mongolia? We don't trade with Mongolia, right? Tariffs only make sense when we're trading, and they only make sense when we're trading because we want to reduce the amount of trade that's going back and forth. Maybe you're like, well, we don't want them to reduce it. We just want them to pay more. Cost goes up. Guess what? All else being equal, demand goes down. So you can't escape it. It's a feature, not a bug. You put up tariffs, you're reducing trade with them. And also then if you want to talk about making a country greater or making, benefiting an industry, then the assumption is that more will be produced at home, which then will somehow offset what we're not getting in trade. All of that embodies and assumes that we are reducing trade and we're reducing the market. Once again, might help an individual industry, but when we look at the country in general, unless we don't believe in the division of labor, we know by the very nature of this that if we've reduced trade, we've reduced markets. If we've reduced markets, we've actually reduced the amount we can produce. And if we reduce the amount we can produce, we've reduced the advantages we can take of the division of labor. So we're not going to take advantage of those efficiencies. We're not going to produce more. We're actually going to produce less. That's why we're paying more. That's not the point either. It's not that we're just paying more. The point is that we have less. The point is that we have less. And if we have less, we are by definition poorer. En masse, even though a couple may have benefited. Any restriction that limits the market, in turn, limits the advantage we can take of the division of labor. That's what it's about. All right? And when we limit our ability to utilize the division of labor, we are in effect actually making us all poorer and worse off. We have less stuff. We might ask, how does that affect me? And it's a good question. And the thing to look at, I'm going to put it this way, because, for better and usually for a lot worse, the sides in today's debates are like, here's the left and here's the right. So let me start on the left, okay, and tell you how it doesn't help you, all right? Tariffs don't help unions. If you're in a union and they're telling you it helps you, you better be in the United Steelworkers Union. If you're in the Steelworkers Union, okay, maybe. But what if I'm in the United Auto Workers Union? The steel import tariffs has just made steel more expensive. If steel more expensive, then the cars produced in the United States that use steel are more expensive. That is, now I have a more expensive car competing internationally against models that could be made, cheaper and sold cheaper. Now you've put the auto plants at a disadvantage. If they sell less and sales go down, are they going to hire more people or lay them off? If you're in the United Mine Workers Union and you need steel for the safety of the mines, right, to hold the shafts together and up, right, supports. If the vehicles that transport you underground are made of steel, if there are anything made of steel now for the mining industry, from big shovels to structures, now that's all more expensive. You've made energy production more expensive in the United States compared to importing it from other places. So you haven't made the coal more expensive, or you haven't made whatever you're mining more expensive because of the mineral. It's because everything that's gone into it. Now, if it's more expensive and can't compete and sells less, once again, what's going to happen to jobs in that industry? You're going to hire more or less. So if you're in any industry right now that uses steel, you're now facing a more competitive, a more difficult competition than you previously had. Your company now has to deal with those costs. And realistically, one way we know the companies deal with costs is either through not hiring or laying people off. So your job could be in jeopardy. If you're a consumer, you're going to pay more. Flat out, you're going to pay more. We will see prices go up in all associated goods with steel. So it won't just be steel imports that go up. It'll be anything made of steel, or especially anything made of steel in this country, or people who use steel in this country to make things. I don't exactly know what metals go into what. I would say toasters, but maybe toasters are all made of aluminum now, refrigerators, anything that steel goes into is going to be more expensive. And, there's kind of nothing more obnoxious, actually, than a person who's affluent saying, yeah, I don't care. I'll pay a little more for my refrigerator if it means that the steel workers get there and more. Well, good for you. Well, what about the people who are struggling? People who are just kind of making by. They can pay the bills. They can put food on the table. They're working hard. And now their refrigerator breaks. And you just made it cost more, or their washing machine, or their dryer. Glad that you can handle that cost and that you're willing to do that for your social cause. But I find it hard to disregard and say, well, to hell with those people who can barely afford it now. We'll just raise their costs and we won't think about it. So yeah, if you're struggling right now to make ends meet, and I'm not saying, like, I'm not poor. Okay, fine. Maybe you're not poor. You have a lot of stuff and a lot of bills. Okay, maybe the cost of everything with steel in it has just gone up. You're going to pay more for your washer. You're going to pay more for your dryer. You're going to pay more for your car. What's going to break next? And when it breaks and you look at the prices online or in the stores next to you, and you're like, son of a, why is everything so expensive? I'm telling you right now, it's not a mystery. And when you're like, I can buy this, but now I can't buy this other thing I wanted to do, right? I can replace the items I need to replace. But since they're so much more expensive, these other things that I wanted, I'm not going to be able to get, which means by definition, you're less wealthy. You got less stuff. And I realize there's a lot of arguments about whether more stuff actually would be wealth or not, but fine, let's engage in those, right? But let's engage in real terms. People are going to have less. That's what the increased cost is. And you're going to face that decision. You're going to face the problems associated with that. And like I said, it runs through everything. If tractors are made of steel and tractors are used to harvest crops, you've just increased the cost of food, flat out, right? You've increased the cost of one of their inputs, so you've increased the cost of production. You've increased it. And this is why tariffs are so dangerous, because people will focus on, once again, the industry and not the broader sort of economic ecosystem market that affects. So yeah, you have the steel industry. I have no doubt that they will probably benefit from this. But you have to weigh that against then everything else that uses steel in production. And by the way, not to just drive this point home too far, but if you raise all of that, so I've raised the cost of growing corn because my costs of production have gone up because anything with steel I've had to pay more for as a farmer. Does it stop there? No. What do you think cows and pigs and chickens, what do they eat? Most of the corn raised is feed corn for livestock. So yeah, your corn prices just went up, but guess what now? All your meat prices went up. Anything that takes corn as an input into it goes up. It never stops. I mean, it's like ripples in a pond, right? We might not see the people who don't get hired in industries where their costs have gone up. We will see the people who get laid off. But we don't trace back our cost of living adjustments to these initial tariffs. And I'll tell you one other thing too. And I saw this during the first Trump administration. And I have nothing personal against anybody. Okay. I'm for limited government. If you're for limited government, woo. If you're not, well, we'll argue. So this is nothing. My hair's not on fire about Mr. Trump. I'm just talking about tariffs. And in the first administration, I saw this. I remember I went to, it was a dinner for local Republicans. And they had speakers. I was one of the speakers. I was honored to be one of the speakers. And somebody from the Chamber of Commerce of Illinois was a speaker. And I talked about this issue and I thought, man, I'm going to get it between the eyes, but I need to talk about this. And when I sat down, while some people kind of gave me the business of how I was wrong, I was surprised at the number, especially of farmers who came up to me and said, I'm really worried about this. And the reason they were worried about it is because it's the thing we all know happens, but I guess we pretend doesn't. So you slap a steel tariff on somebody else, big exporters of steel, they're big exporters of steel. We've just slapped a tariff on them. Are they going to slap another tariff on steel? Nope. They're going to find an industry where they can retaliate, where they think it hurts us. They think it does. I'll just say it that far. So they're going to slap tariffs on agricultural products. We export a lot of soybeans and corn to the world. And if they slap retaliatory tariffs on those, what do you think you've done to the export markets for those industries? For the farmers we supposedly care about to put the food on our table. We've thrown them under the bus. Not a steel bus because we can't afford that anymore, but aluminum buses hurt too. So you've thrown your fellow countrymen under the bus and pretend it doesn't exist. Yeah, when you champion tariffs. Sorry if that makes you mad, but it makes the rest of us poor. All right, I actually just learned this. I was this many years old when I learned this, and I want to go and look up it more. Remember, everything I pose here is an argument. I don't think I'm wrong. I wouldn't waste my breath on it if I thought I was wrong. I put it forth as this is correct. But of course, you'll argue back, and we'll arrive hopefully somewhere that's just a reasonable space. But I grew up thinking that the Great Depression, right? All that unemployment, huge loss of wealth and GNP and all that stuff, right? It's the Great Depression. It's awfulness, economic awfulness. It did affect the globe. I thought it was the same everywhere in the globe. Like I thought there were bread lines everywhere in the world. I thought that there was, like in the United States, and it turns out it wasn't. That the Great Depression actually was worse in the United States than in the rest of the world, or at least in the rest of the world that didn't do the following. So the United States, very early on in the Great Depression, right, wanted to tariff our way out of the Depression. So they passed the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which is erected huge tariffs. Economists are pretty much universal that worsened the Depression, right? Us isolating ourselves from trade. You may or may not believe that, but take a look at how the rest of the world fared in the Great Depression, and you will see that it was worse here. And one of the leading suspects, let us say, of why it was worse in the United States, right? The economic powerhouse of the United States, the Great Depression was worst here because, we restricted trade. We thought that would make us better off. And in fact, it most certainly didn't. And if you look and compare the United States to other countries during the Great Depression, you will see exactly that. If you look to the Bush administration in the early 2000s, they erected, I believe, a steel tariff during their administration as well. What happened then, and I don't know if it's happening now, we'll see if it is, but those steel tariffs actually were very quickly overturned, if you will, nullified, however you want to put it. You pull back on them. And the reason is remember what I said, is everything you make with steel gets more expensive, and it makes the life for everybody else more expensive. Yeah, all these manufacturers who use steel, who themselves aren't steel producers, actually coordinated their efforts and took the message to the Bush administration that you're helping this amount of people, businesses, however you want to put it, are paying the cost for that. And you're crippling us by trying to help this little sliver. And it was effective. They repealed the tariffs. So I think that'd be another example, one could potentially look at. Another historical example, and this goes way back, and I'm not a scholar on China, so I'm not going to know, but it's worth looking at that China at one time was a world trade power. They were making ships that eclipsed what was possible in Europe at a similar time. They had huge ships. They had huge international trade networks. They were wealthy. They were thriving in that sort of economic sense, which also leads to thriving in a cultural sense. And at one point, some emperor said, no, that's a lot of foreign influences, and we're not really benefiting from that. And, we're not going to do it anymore. And they scrapped the fleet, and they scrapped international trade. And China not only economically pays for that, but in many other ways, right? So a country that was vibrant with scientific discoveries and, like I said, cultural achievements, and just really a flourishing culture, far ahead of its European counterparts, like I said, in certain things, all of a sudden disappears on the scientific advancement front, and becomes isolationist economically. And, well, you look at the history and you tell me, but from what we can see now, yeah, it wasn't a good move. Sorry, Kenley. Thank you for joining us. We're going to end here, but I want to remind you it's about the division of labor. Free trade comes later. Wealth is producing more stuff. You produce more stuff by taking advantage of the division of labor. But that's only worth it if you can sell it. What that means, you have to have a market for it. Anything that increases the market increases the amount we can produce, which increases the amount of division of labor that we can engage in, which means we're more efficient, we produce more, we're all wealthier. Anything that reduces the market reduces the amount that it's even worth to produce, which also then means that we don't take full advantage of the division of labor, which means we have less stuff and it's more expensive. And as I said in the video too, we'll have less employment as well. You'll have people being laid off. This is where tariffs hit us, at the division of labor. So I want to thank you for joining us today. I encourage you to read the first 3 chapters of Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations and look that up. Hope I've given you something to think about. Thank you and have a good day.